health care law. Republicans have said they want to start the effort to repeal the law or to take away some of the funding mechanism for pieces of the law, because, as you know, the president holds the veto pen and Republicans wouldn't be able to overcome that. The health care law will likely be a key question in the back and forth with reporters, though.
You know, Brett, obviously there have been some major addresses by President Obama, including the ones specifically with respect to our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. But politically speaking, can you remember a bigger one for the president than this one?
No, think about it. We are still about somewhere between 63 and 67 seats in Republican pickup in the House. That is massive. Not since 1948 has that happened. And you are looking at a president who has to deal with an entirely different dynamic here in Washington with a new speaker-to-be. And how he will deal with Republicans will essentially set the tone for the 2012 race. He is expected, of course, to run for re-election.
We're now within 60 seconds of the president. Brett, this is a president who's not used to losing.
He's not used to losing, and he hasn't taken it well. He's sometimes, people say, he's thin-skinned. Analysts look at some of the things he said and done throughout the campaign season about Republicans. Now he has to come back and reach across the aisle. Will he do what President Bill Clinton did back in 1994 and do that and work on things like welfare reform and work with people back then like Newt Gingrich, now like John Boehner, the speaker-to-be? In just a moment, you'll see the president walk from the state dining room down Cross Hall, and you'll see him walk into the East Room.
And as you say it, it happens. Bret Baier, thank you so much. Let's take a listen to President Obama.
Good afternoon, everybody. Last night, I had a chance to speak to the leaders of the House and the Senate and reached out to those who had both won and lost in both parties. I told John Boehner and Mitch McConnell that I look forward to working with them. And I thanked Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid for their extraordinary leadership over the last 2 years. After what I'm sure was a long night for a lot of you, and needless to say, it was for me, I can tell you that, some election nights are more fun than others. Some are exhilarating. Some are humbling. But every election, regardless of who wins and who loses, is a reminder that in our democracy, power rests not with those of us in elected office, but with the people we have the privilege to serve. Over the last few months, I've had the opportunity to travel around the country and meet people where they live and where they work, from backyards to factory floors. I did some talking, but mostly I did a lot of listening. And yesterday's vote confirmed what I've heard from folks all across America. People are frustrated. They're deeply frustrated with the pace of our economic recovery and the opportunities that they hope for their children and their grandchildren. They want jobs to come back faster. They want paychecks to go further. And they want the ability to give their children the same chances and opportunities as they've had in life. Now, the men and women who sent us here don't expect Washington to solve all their problems, but they do expect Washington to work for them, not against them. They want to know that their tax dollars are being spent wisely, not wasted, and that we're not going to leave our children a legacy of debt. They want to know that their voices aren't being drowned out by a sea of lobbyists and special interests and partisan bickering. They want business to be done here openly and honestly. Now, I ran for this office to tackle these challenges and give voice to the concerns of everyday people. Over the last 2 years, we've made progress, but clearly too many Americans haven't felt that progress yet, and they told us that yesterday. And as president, I take responsibility for that. What yesterday also told us is that no one party will be able to dictate where we go from here, that we must find common ground in order to in order to make progress on some uncommonly difficult challenges. And I told John Boehner and Mitch McConnell last night, I am very eager to sit down with members of both parties and figure out how we can move forward together. I'm not suggesting this will be easy, I won't pretend that we will be able to bridge every difference or solve every disagreement. There's a reason we have two parties in this country, and both Democrats and Republicans have certain beliefs and certain principles that each feels cannot be compromised. But what I think the American people are expecting, and what we owe them, is to focus on those issues that affect their jobs, their security, and their future, reducing our deficit, promoting a clean energy economy, making sure that our children are the best educated in the world, making sure that we're making the investments in technology that will allow us to keep our competitive edge in the global economy. Because the most important contest we face is not the contest between Democrats and Republicans. In this century, the most important competition we face is between America and our economic competitors around the world. To win that competition and to continue our economic leadership, we're going to need to be strong and we're going to need to be united. Now, none of the challenges we face lend themselves to simple solutions or bumper sticker slogans, nor are the answers found in any one particular philosophy or ideology. As I've said before, no person, no party has a monopoly on wisdom. And that's why I'm eager to hear good ideas wherever they come from, whoever proposes them. And that's why I believe it's important to have an honest and civil debate about the choices that we face. That's why I want to engage both Democrats and Republicans in serious conversations about where we're going as a nation. And with so much at stake, what the American people don't want from us, especially here in Washington, is to spend the next 2 years refighting the political battles of the last two. We just had a tough election. We will have another in 2012. I'm not so naive as to think that everybody will put politics aside until then, but I do hope to make progress on the various serious problems facing us right now. And that's going to require all of us, including me, to work harder at building consensus. You know, a little over a month ago, we held a town hall meeting in Richmond, Virginia. And one of the most telling questions came from a small business owner who runs a tree care firm. He told me how hard he works and how busy he was, how he doesn't have time to pay attention to all the back and forth in Washington. And he asked, is there hope for us returning to civility in our discourse, to a healthy legislative process? So as I strap on the boots again tomorrow, I know that you guys got it under control. It's hard to have faith in that right now, he said. I do believe there is hope for civility. I do believe there's hope for progress. And that's because I believe in the resiliency of a nation that's bounced back from much worse than what we're going through right now. A nation that's overcome war and depression, that has been made more perfect in our struggle for individual rights and individual freedoms. Each time progress has come slowly and even painfully, but progress has always come because we've worked at it and because we've believed in it, and most of all because we remembered that our first allegiance as citizens is not to party or region or faction, but to country. Because while we may be proud Democrats or proud Republicans, we are prouder to be Americans. And that's something that we all need to remember right now and in the coming months. And if we do, I have no doubt that we will continue this nation's long journey towards a better future. So with that, let me take some questions. I'm going to start off with Ben Feller at AP.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are you willing to concede at all that what happened last night was not just an expression of frustration about the economy, but a fundamental rejection of your agenda? And given the results, who do you think speaks to the true voice of the American people right now, you or John Boehner?
I think that there is no doubt that people's number one concern is the economy. And what they were expressing great frustration about is the fact that we haven't made enough progress on the economy. We've stabilized the economy. We've got job growth in the private sectors. But people all across America aren't feeling that progress. They don't see it. And they understand that I'm the President of the United States, and that my core responsibility is making sure that we've got an economy that's growing, a middle class that feels secure, that jobs are being created. And so I think I've got to take direct responsibility for the fact that we have not made as much progress as we need to make. Now, moving forward, I think the question is going to be, can Democrats and Republicans sit down together and come up with a set of ideas that address those core concerns? I'm confident that we can. I think that there are some areas where it's going to be very difficult for us to agree on. But I think there are going to be a whole bunch of areas where we can agree on. I don't think there's anybody in America who thinks that we've got an energy policy that works the way it needs to, that thinks that we shouldn't be working on energy independence. And that gives opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to come together and think about whether it's natural gas or energy efficiency or how we can build electric cars in this country. How do we move forward on that agenda? I think everybody in this country thinks that we've got to make sure our kids are equipped in terms of their education, their science background, their math backgrounds to compete in this new global economy. And that's going to be an area where I think there's potential common ground. So on a whole range of issues, there are going to be areas where we disagree. I think the overwhelming message that I hear from the voters is that we want everybody to act responsibly in Washington. We want you to work harder to arrive at consensus. We want you to focus completely on jobs and the economy and growing it so that we're ensuring a better future for our children and our grandchildren. I think that there's no doubt that as I reflect on the results of the election, it underscores for me that I've got to do a better job, just like everybody else in Washington does. Well, I think John Boehner and I and Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi are going to have to sit down and work together, because I suspect that if you talk to any individual voter yesterday, they'd say, there's some things I agree with Democrats on, there's some things I agree with Republicans on. I don't think people carry around with them a fixed ideology. I think the majority of people, they're going about their business, going about their lives. They just want to make sure that we're making progress. And that's going to be my top priority over the next couple of years. Savannah Guthrie.
Just following up on what Ben just talked about, you don't seem to be reflecting or second-guessing any of the policy decisions you've made. Instead, saying the message the voters were sending was about frustration with the economy, or maybe even chalking it up to a failure on your part to communicate effectively. If you're not reflecting on your policy agenda, is it possible voters can conclude you're still not getting it?
Well, Savannah, that was just the first question, so we're going to have a few more here. I'm doing a whole lot of reflecting, and I think that there are going to be areas in policy where we're going to have to do a better job. I think that over the last 2 years, we have made a series of very tough decisions, but decisions that were right in terms of moving the country forward in an emergency situation where we had the risk of slipping into a second Great Depression. But what is absolutely true is that with all that stuff coming at folks fast and furious, a recovery package, what we had to do with respect to the banks, what we had to do with respect to the auto companies, I think people started looking at all this, and it felt as if government was getting much more intrusive into people's lives than they were accustomed to. Now, the reason was it was an emergency situation. But I think it's understandable that folks said to themselves, maybe this is the agenda as opposed to a response to an emergency. And that's something that I think, everybody in the White House understood was a danger. We thought it was necessary. But I'm sympathetic to folks who looked at it and said, this is looking like potential overreach. You know, in addition, there are a bunch of price tags that went with that. And so even though these were emergency situations, people rightly said, gosh, we already have all this debt. We already have these big deficits. This is potentially going to compound it. And at what point are we going to get back to a situation where we're doing what families all around the country do, which is make sure that if you spend something, you know how to pay for it, as opposed to racking up the credit card for the next generation. And I think that the other thing that happened is that, when I won election in 2008, one of the reasons I think that people were excited about the campaign was the prospect that we would change how business is done in Washington. And we were in such a hurry to get things done that we didn't change how things got done. And I think that frustrated people. I'm a strong believer that the earmarking process in Congress isn't what the American people really want to see when it comes to making tough decisions about how taxpayer dollars are spent. And I, in the rush to get things done, had to sign a bunch of bills that had earmarks in them, which was contrary to what I had talked about. And I think, folks look at that and they said, gosh, this feels like the same partisan squabbling. This seems like the same ways of doing business as happened before. And so, one of the things that I've got to take responsibility for is not having moved enough on those fronts. And I think there is an opportunity to move forward on some of those issues. My understanding is Eric Cantor today said that he wanted to see a moratorium on earmarks continuing. That's something I think we can work on together.
But you still resist the notion that voters rejected the policy choices you made?
Well, Savannah, I think that what I think is absolutely true is voters are not satisfied with the outcomes. I mean, if right now we had 5% unemployment instead of 9.6% unemployment, then people would have more confidence in those policy choices. The fact is that, for most folks, proof of whether they work or not is, has the economy gotten back to where it needs to be? And it hasn't. And so my job is to make sure that I'm looking at all ideas that are on the table. When it comes to job creation, if Republicans have good ideas for job growth that can drive down the unemployment rate, and we haven't thought of them, we haven't looked at them, but we think they have a chance of working, we want to try. forward in a serious way. So, I think when it comes to something like energy, what we're probably going to have to do is say, here are some areas where there's just too much disagreement between Democrats and Republicans. We can't get this done right now, but let's not wait. Let's go ahead and start making some progress on the things that we do agree on. And we can continue to have a strong and healthy debate about those areas where we don't.
Pledge to America that you think you can support?
I'm sure there are going to be areas, particularly around, for example, reforming how Washington works, that I'll be interested in. I think the American people want to see more transparency, more openness. As I said, in the midst of economic crisis, I think one of the things I take responsibility for is not having pushed harder on some of those issues. And I think if you take Republicans and Democrats at their word, this is an area that they want to deliver on for the American people. I want to be supportive of that effort. Jake Tapper.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a policy question and a personal one. The policy question is, you talked about how the immediate goal is the Bush tax cuts and making sure that they don't expire for those who earn under $250,000.
Right.
Republicans disagree with that strongly. They want all of the Bush tax cuts extended. Are you willing to compromise on that? Are you willing to negotiate at all, for instance, allow them to expire for everyone over $1 million? Where are you willing to budge on that? And the second one is, President Bush, when he went through a similar thing, came out and he said this was a thumping. And you talked about how it was humbling, or you alluded to it perhaps being humbling. And I'm wondering, when you call your friends, like Congressman Perriello or Governor Strickland, and you see 19 state legislatures go to the other side, governorships in swing states, the Democratic Party set back, what does it feel like?
Feels bad. The toughest thing over the last couple of days is seeing really terrific public servants not have the opportunity to serve anymore, at least in the short term. And you mentioned there are just some terrific members of Congress who took really tough votes because they thought it was the right thing, even though they knew this could cause them political problems. And even though a lot of them came from really tough swing districts or majority Republican districts. And the amount of courage that they showed and conviction that they showed is something that I admire so much. I can't overstate it. And so there is not only sadness about seeing them go, but there's also a lot of questioning on my part in terms of, could I have done something differently or done something more so that those folks would still be here. It's hard, and I take responsibility for it in a lot of ways. I will tell you that they've been incredibly gracious when I have conversations with them, and what they've told me is, we don't have regrets because I feel like we were doing the right thing, and they may be just saying that to make me feel better, which again is a sign of their character and their class. And I hope a lot of them continue to pursue public service, because I think they're terrific public servants. With respect to the tax cut issue, my goal is to make sure that we don't have a huge spike in taxes for middle-class families. Not only would that be a terrible burden on families who are already going through tough times, it would be bad for our economy. It is very important that we're not taking a whole bunch of money out of the system from people who are most likely to spend that money on goods, services, groceries, buying a new winter coat for the kids. That's also why I think unemployment insurance is important. Not only is it the right thing to do for folks who are still looking for work and struggling in this really tough economy, but it's the right thing to do for the economy as a whole. So my goal is to sit down with Speaker-elect Boehner and Mitch McConnell, like Harry and Nancy, sometime in the next few weeks, and see where we can move forward in a way that, first of all, does no harm, that extends those tax cuts that are very important for middle-class families, also extends those provisions that are important to encourage businesses to invest and provide businesses some certainty over the next year or two. And how that negotiation works itself out, I think it's too early to say. But this is going to be one of my top priorities, and my hope is that given we all have an interest in growing the economy and encouraging job growth, that we're not going to play brinksmanship, but instead we're going to act responsibly.
You're willing to negotiate.
Absolutely. Laura Meckler.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said earlier that it was clear that the Congress was rejecting the idea of a cap-and-trade program and that you wouldn't be able to move forward with that. Looking ahead, do you feel the same way about EPA regulating carbon emissions? Would you be open to them doing essentially the same thing through an administrative action, or is that off the table as well? And secondly, just to follow up on what you said about changing the way Washington works, do you think that you said you didn't do enough to change the way things were handled in this city? In order to get your health care bill passed, you needed to make some of those deals. Yeah. Do you wish, in retrospect, you had not made those deals, and even if it meant the collapse of the program?
I think that making sure that families had security and that we're on a trajectory to lower health care costs was absolutely critical for this country. But you are absolutely right that when you are navigating through a House and a Senate in this kind of pretty partisan environment, that it's an ugly mess when it comes to process. I think that is something that really affected how people viewed the outcome. That is something that I regret, that we couldn't have made the process more healthier than it ended up being. But I think the outcome was a good one. With respect to the EPA, I think the smartest thing for us to do is to see if we can get Democrats and Republicans in a room who are serious about energy independence and are serious about keeping our air clean and our water clean and dealing with the issue of greenhouse gases, and seeing are there ways that we can make progress in the short term and invest in technologies in the long term that start giving us the tools to reduce greenhouse gases and solve this problem. The EPA is under a court order that says greenhouse gases are a pollutant that fall under their jurisdiction. And I think one of the things that's very important for me is not to have us ignore the science, but rather to find ways that we can solve these problems that don't hurt the economy, that encourage the development of clean energy in this country, that in fact may give us opportunities to create entire new industries and create jobs that put us in a competitive posture around the world. So I think it's too early to say whether or not we can make some progress on that front. I think we can. Cap and trade was just one way of skinning the cat. It was not the only way. It was a means, not an end. And I'm going to be looking for other means to address this problem. And I think the EPA wants help from the legislature on this. I don't think that the desire is to somehow be protective of their powers here. I think what they want to do is make sure that the issue is being dealt with. Okay. Ed Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to do a personal and policy one as well. On personal, you had a lot of fun on the campaign trail by saying that the Republicans were drinking a Slurpee and sitting on the sidelines while you were trying to pull the car out of the ditch. But the point of the story was that you said if you want to go forward, you put the car in D. If you want to go backwards, you put it in R. Now that there are at least 60 House districts that seem to have rejected that message, is it possible that there are a majority of Americans who think your policies are taking us in reverse? And what specific changes will you make to your approach to try to fix that and better connect with the American people. And just on a policy front, don't ask, don't tell is something that you promised to end. And when you had 60 votes and 59 votes in the Senate, it's a tough issue. You haven't been able to do it. Do you now have to tell your liberal base that with maybe 52 or 53 votes in the Senate, you're just not going to be able to get it done in the next 2 years?
Well, let me take the second issue first. I've been a strong believer in the notion that if somebody is willing to serve in our military, in uniform, putting their lives on the line for our security, that they should not be prevented from doing so because of their sexual orientation. And since there's been a lot of discussion about polls over the last 48 hours, I think it's worth noting that the overwhelming majority of Americans feel the same way. It's the right thing to do. Now, as Commander-in-Chief, I've said that making this change needs to be done in an orderly fashion. I've worked with the Pentagon, worked with Secretary Gates, worked with Admiral Mullen to make sure that we are looking at this in a systematic way that maintains good order and discipline, but that we need to change this policy. There's going to be a review that comes out at the beginning of the month that will have surveyed attitudes and opinions within the armed forces. I will expect that Secretary of Defense Gates and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, will have something to say about that review. I will look at it very carefully. But that will give us time to act in potentially during the lame duck session to change this policy. Keep in mind we've got a bunch of court cases that are out there as well. And something that would be very disruptive to good order and discipline and unit cohesion is if we've got this issue bouncing around in the courts, as it already has over the last several weeks, where the Pentagon and the chain of command doesn't know at any given time what rules they're working under. We need to provide certainty, and it's time for us to move this policy forward, and this should not be a partisan issue. This is an issue, as I said, where you've got a sizable portion of the American people squarely behind the notion that folks who are willing to serve on our behalf should be treated fairly and equally. Now, in terms of how we move forward, I think that the American people understand that we're still digging our way out of a pretty big mess. So I don't think anybody denies they think we're in a ditch. I just don't think they feel like we've gotten all the way out of the ditch yet. And to move the analogy forward that I used in the campaign, I think what they want right now is the Democrats and the Republicans both pushing some more to get the car on level ground. And we haven't done that. If you think I was engaging in too much campaign rhetoric saying the Republicans were just sitting on the side of the road watching us get that car out of the ditch, at the very least, we were pushing in opposite directions. And so
that your policies are taking the country in reverse. You just reject that idea altogether that your policies could be going in reverse.
yes, and I think look, here's the bottom line. When I came into office, this economy was in a free fall, and the economy has stabilized. The economy is growing. We've seen 9 months of private sector job growth. So I think it'd be hard to argue that we're going backwards. I think what you can argue is we're stuck in neutral. Right? We are not moving the way we need to make sure that folks have the jobs, have the opportunity, are seeing economic growth in their communities the way they need to. And that's going to require Democrats and Republicans to come together and look for the best ideas to move things forward. It will not be easy, not just because Democrats and Republicans may have different priorities, as we were just discussing when it came to how we structure tax cuts, but because these issues are hard. The Republicans throughout the campaign said they're very concerned about debt and deficits. Well, one of the most important things we can do for debt and deficits is economic growth. So what other proposals do they have to grow the economy? If, in fact, they're rejecting some of the proposals I've made, I want to hear from them what affirmative policies can make a difference in terms of encouraging job growth and promoting the economy. Because, I don't think that tax cuts alone are going to be a recipe for the kind of expansion that we need. From 2001 to 2009, we cut taxes pretty significantly, and we just didn't see the kind of expansion that is going to be necessary in terms of driving the unemployment rate down significantly. So I think what we're going to need to do, and what the American people want, is for us to mix and match ideas, figure out those areas where we can agree on, move forward on those, disagree without being disagreeable on those areas that we can't agree on. If we accomplish that, then there will be time for politics later, but over the next year, I think we can solidify this recovery and give people a little more confidence out there. Hans Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to ask if you're going to have John Boehner over for a Slurpee, but I actually have a serious question.
I might serve. They're delicious drinks. The Slurpee Summit. That's good. I like that.
Since you seem to be in a reflective mood, do you think you need to hit the reset button with business? How do you plan to set that reset button with business? Would you include anything beyond your Cleveland speech, those proposals, to get them off the sidelines, get them off the cash they're hoarding, and start hiring again? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is an important question that we've been asking ourselves for several months now. You're right. As I reflect on what's happened over the last 2 years, one of the things that I think has not been managed by me as well as it needed to be was finding the right balance in making sure that businesses have rules of the road and are treating customers fairly, and whether it's their credit cards or insurance or their mortgages, but also making absolutely clear that the only way America succeeds is if businesses are succeeding. The reason we've got a unparalleled standard of living in the history of the world is because we've got a free market that is dynamic and entrepreneurial, and that free market has to be nurtured and cultivated. And there's no doubt that when you had the financial crisis on Wall Street, the bonus controversies, the battle around health care, battle around financial reform, and then you had BP, you just had a successive set of issues in which I think business took the message that, well, gosh, it seems like we may be always painted as the bad guy. And so I've got to take responsibility in terms of making sure that I make clear to the business community as well as to the country that the most important thing we can do is to boost and encourage our business sector and make sure that they're hiring. And so we do have specific plans in terms of how we can structure that outreach. Now, keep in mind, over the last 2 years, we've been talking to CEOs constantly. And as I plan for my trip later this week to Asia, the whole focus is on how are we going to open up markets so that American businesses can prosper and we can sell more goods and create more jobs here in the United States. And a whole bunch of corporate executives are going to be joining us so that I can help them open up those markets and allow them to sell their products. So there's been a lot of strong interaction behind the scenes, but I think setting the right tone publicly is going to be important, and it could end up making a difference at the margins in terms of how businesses make investment decisions.
Would you have new specific proposals to get them off the sidelines and start hiring?
Well, I already discussed a couple with Chip that haven't been acted on yet. You're right that I made these proposals 2 months ago, but or 3 months ago, but it was in the midst of a campaign season where it was doubtful that they were going to get a full hearing, just because there was so much political noise going on. I think as we move forward, sitting down and talking to businesses, figuring out what exactly would help you make more investments that could create more jobs here in the United States, and you know, listening hard to them in a context where maybe Democrats and Republicans are together, so we're receiving the same message at the same time, and then acting on that agenda could make a big difference. Matt Spitalny, Reuters.
Thank you, Mr. President. How do you respond to those who say the election outcome, at least in part, was voters saying that they see you as out of touch with their personal economic pain? And are you willing to make any changes in your leadership style?
You know, there is an inherent danger in being in the White House and being in the bubble. I mean, folks didn't have any complaints about my leadership style when I was running around Iowa for a year, and they got a pretty good look at me up close and personal, and they were able to lift the hood and kick the tires, and you know, I think they understood that my story was theirs. I might have a funny name, I might you know, have lived in some different places, but you know, the values of hard work and responsibility and honesty and looking out for one another that had been instilled in them by their parents, those were the same values that I took from my mom and my grandparents. And so, you know, the track record has been that when I'm out of this place, that's not an issue. When you're in this place, it is hard not to seem removed. And one of the challenges that we've got to think about is how do I meet my responsibilities here in the White House, which require a lot of hours and a lot of work, but still, you know, have that opportunity to engage with the American people on a day-to-day basis, and give them confidence that I'm listening to them. You know, those letters that I read every night, some of them just break my heart. Some of them provide me encouragement and inspiration. But nobody's filming me reading those letters. And so it's hard, I think, for people to get a sense of, well, how's he taken in all this information? So I think there are more things that we can do to make sure that I'm getting out of here. But you know, I mean, I think it's important to point out as well that you know, a couple of great communicators, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, were standing at this podium 2 years into their presidency, getting very similar questions because you know, the economy wasn't working the way it needed to be, and there were a whole range of factors that made people concerned that maybe the party in power wasn't listening to them. You know, this is something that I think every president needs to go through because you know, the responsibilities of this office are so enormous, and so many people are depending on what we do. And in the rush of activity, sometimes we lose track of you know, the ways that we connected with folks that got us here in the first place, and that's something that. Yeah, now, I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night. You know, I'm sure there are easier ways to learn these lessons, but I do think that you know, this is a growth process and an evolution. And the relationship that I've had with the American people is one that built slowly, peaked at this incredible high, and then during the course of the last 2 years, as we've together gone through some very difficult times, has gotten rockier and tougher. And, it's going to, I'm sure, have some more ups and downs during the course of me being in this office. But the one thing that I just want to end on is getting out of here is good for me, too. Because when I travel around the country, even in the toughest of these debates, in the midst of health care last year during summer when there were protesters about, and, when I'm meeting families who've lost loved ones in Afghanistan or Iraq, I always come away from those interactions just feeling so much more optimistic about this country. We have such good and decent people who, on a day-to-day basis, are finding all kinds of ways to live together and educate kids and grow their communities and improve their communities and create businesses and work together to create great new products and services. And, the American people always make me optimistic, and that's why during the course of the last 2 years, as tough as it's been, as many sometimes scary moments as we've gone through, I've never doubted that we're going to emerge stronger than we were before. And I think that remains true, and I'm just going to be looking forward to playing my part in helping that journey along. All right? Thank you very much, everybody.
Mr. President.
An extraordinary news conference from the President of the United States reacting to stunning losses in the House and the Senate and at the gubernatorial level last night as the GOP made major gains, and the general consensus was it was a rejection in large measure of President Obama's policies, something he acknowledged in part and made clear that in his view he thought last night was all about the economy, that the president and his agenda had made progress on that front, but the American people are not feeling it, saying that we want people to act responsibly in D.C. was the message he took from Americans, and to achieve consensus and to focus completely on jobs. There was plenty in there to chew on. I want to bring in our political panel now for their perspective, including Monica Crowley, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Also Richard Socarides, Democratic strategist and former special assistant to President Clinton. And Doug Schoen, Democratic pollster and co-author of the book Mad as Hell. He's also a Fox News contributor. Monica, let me start with you. Your thoughts, your overall thoughts on the president's message.
Well, first of all, he looked like he was passing a gallstone. He was not very happy to be there, and understandably so. What I found very remarkable about this presser, Megyn, is the fact that he seemed self-aware toward the end of the press conference, sort of reflecting on the personal nature of his job. But there wasn't a lot of self-awareness about the wholesale rejection last night of his major legislative achievements, namely Obamacare, namely the nearly $1 trillion in stimulus, namely even cap and trade, which he did spend a good deal of time talking about. He also didn't acknowledge that the American people over the past 2 years have felt two different levels of fear and anxiety. The first level is the urgent and immediate economic fear. Am I going to be able to keep my job? Am I going to lose my job? Will I ever find another job? Is the bank going to foreclose on my home? But there's a more profound level of fear that was percolating underneath all of that, which is that the very nature of America is changing under this presidency and changing under the last Congress.
But he tried to acknowledge that in part where he said people have misperceived, if you will, that that's my agenda as opposed to my reaction to what he repeatedly described as an emergency. We were in an emergency situation. He did not particularly use that to justify the health care law, but he used it to talk about stimulus and bailing out the banks and bailing out the auto industry. And he suggested that people sort of had had the wrong idea that he was about big government as a result of that.
But here's the inconsistency, Megyn. He was talking about being in a rush, that I had to sign all of these very incredibly expensive bills that blew up the deficit because we were in a fiscal and economic emergency. Well, then why, pray tell, did he spend a year focused on Obamacare? He blew the first year of his presidency, blew through a lot of the political capital he had when he got in on a health care bill that most Americans did not want and that we could not afford. Now I find it remarkable that he is saying, well, now we've got to focus on jobs, we've got to focus on improving relations with the business community, we've got to focus on economic growth. Megyn, he blew the first year and a half of his presidency focused elsewhere. And now maybe the Republican Congress will force his hand on a lot of these issues to get economic growth going, namely the Bush tax cuts and so on. But even there, he would only go halfway and not say that he was for the extension of all of the Bush tax cuts.
Doug, let me bring you in because you've done a lot of polling on this. This is just one example. I got a lot of emails from our viewers. We're taking them still at kelly@foxnews.com. But this is one example that is representative of several. From Brian in Warwick, New York. Hi, Megyn. He says, listening to Obama's speech, in all caps, he still doesn't get it. We want small government, tax cuts, and massive spending cuts. Period. Doug?
Well, Megyn, there are certainly voters who feel like that email reflects. But bottom line, and I think Monica is going a little too far, this was a humble, contrite president who was suggesting he's willing to go much further to meet the Republicans halfway than he's gone before on job development, on taxes, and even tax cuts. Bargaining is done over time. You have to look forward, not backwards. And my sense was this was the start of a process, an important press conference, and I think to look prospectively at what this could imply gives hope for those of us moderate Democrats who believe in bipartisan cooperation. Haven't seen it, as Monica suggested, in the past, but the president is signaling he's open to deal.
Richard, you know, when I heard the president talk about areas where they might now be able to find common ground, this is what he ticked off. Jobs, clean energy, work on the deficit, education, and technology investments. It didn't sound like anything that ambitious. It sounded like a much different agenda than we heard from this president back in 2008.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, clearly he is still trying to absorb what happened last night. And, you know, I thought that in the beginning he was a little flat, a little, you know, could have been a little more passionate. I think what he had to do today, I agree with Doug that I think it was very important and it's a beginning, but I think what he had to do today was let the American people know that he understood what happened, and he did that a little bit more at the end where he said we took a shellacking. And
he humanized himself there.
He warmed up. He definitely warmed up. He said, I thought that was important that he said it was a shellacking, and then also he said that
it feels bad.
He lost track. He lost track a little bit, and he feels bad. So I think that was important. But what I would have hoped to have seen a little bit more of was a plan going forward. I mean, there was no talk about bringing new people in. I think it's really important for him now to bring in some Republicans, to bring in some moderate Republicans into the White House and on the White House staff and expand that field of play there. And I just think that he's still absorbing this. He was a little passionless for me.
Monica, do you think, bottom line as you walk away today, that he is changed, that his approach to his policy making has now changed?
You know, Megyn, there is nothing in his political character or temperament or even in his political history to suggest moderation. And I didn't hear anything to change my mind on that today. What I heard was a man who talked about a willingness to sit with the other side, a willingness to compromise on certain small bore issues, as you pointed out. But remember, over the past year and a half, he has used that line before on health care. Well, I'll bring in the Republicans, and if they've got some good ideas, I'll be happy to listen to them. There's a difference between sitting down with somebody and just letting them go off on their ideas and actually absorbing and incorporating those ideas. He did not do that in the last year and a half. Now, the complexion of the Congress will change come January. He might be forced to, but there is nothing in his past history to suggest that he will do a Bill Clinton and tone down the ideology and be more pragmatic.
And I want to get a quick answer from Richard and Doug on this. You know, he seemed to have a new justification justification today with respect to the stimulus and some of his bailouts that were very unpopular with some of the voters. We heard several times today, emergency. It was an emergency. Right. We had to act, and we heard a theme he's developed over the past 2 weeks, which was we had to prevent a second Great Depression. Doug, is it too little on that, or is that now an effective message for him?
Well, I think that is his pivot to all ideas are on the table. I think what he was saying to me was, look, I'm willing to do tax cuts if you give me something for business. I'm willing to put energy initiatives on the table. I heard a new willingness to cooperate, and to Monica's point, given the change in the Congress, he's going to have to, otherwise he's a one-term president.
You agree with that, Richard?
I do. I heard a new willingness to cooperate. I don't think anybody expected him to walk away from the substance of the policy debate that we've been having, either on financial regulatory reform or on health care. I mean, he can't do that now. But I do think there's a new willingness to compromise. I wish I had seen a little bit more specifically about what he's going to do to change the culture, to encourage cooperation, but that can come. I think they're still absorbing it. It's very tough. I think he warmed up at the end, and I think it's headed in the right direction.
On health care, he said we would be misreading the election if we thought Americans want to see us relitigate these issues. But he did say if the Republicans want to suggest modifications, he's happy to consider them. You heard him talk about his willingness to listen. Yeah, he said this. John Boehner said he's willing to listen. A lot of people are going to be listening. We'll find out who's going to be doing the talking. Not us anymore, because I got to wrap this panel. Richard, Doug, Monica, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Megan.
And we have a Fox News election alert here in this new hour of America Live. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. We are getting word right now that we should be expecting a victory speech by incumbent Democratic Senator Michael Bennet in Colorado. Last we heard, Bennet had such a narrow lead over Republican challenger Ken Buck that it could force a mandatory recount. And we are not hearing that this race has been called. It has not been called by Fox News. We're not hearing that it's been called by the AP either. Leland Vittert has more. He's live in Denver trying to sort this out for us. So, Leland, we're going to have the victory speech before the race has been called?
Before the race has been called, or even before Ken Buck offers his concession. There's a lot of balls in the air here, Megan. We're going to start with that victory speech by Michael Bennet coming up in a few minutes. He has also declared victory on Facebook, as you noted, before either he's been declared the victor by AP or a concession was offered. We have a lot going on here. The leaderboard has been shifting back and forth all night and into the early morning. Let's take a look at the latest vote count. It has Michael Bennet up by about 15,000 votes. The important thing to note in this, those 15,000 votes equal about a percentage point. If that closes to less than half of a percentage point, mandatory recount in Colorado, and we know those recounts can go a very long time, even into December. Last night, Ken Buck was with us here. He allowed us up into his hotel suite to shoot him watching the results come in. After looking at some exit polls, Buck had told us he's only written one speech, meaning his victory speech. He certainly has not given that yet. Back here in Denver today, there's a bunch of other problems we're trying to sort out. Number one, the AP yesterday had some glitches in its vote reporting. Evidently, they miscounted a number of the votes, so that threw everybody's thinking off for a while. We had voter irregularities in El Paso County where they kept the polls open an additional 2 hours in trying to get let some other people vote. So a lot going on here, Megan. We'll see when that victory speech comes in a couple of minutes.
Wow, that'll be interesting to watch. Leland, thank you so much. Keep us updated. Well, Colorado is not the only state still too close to call. Still undecided right now, Senate races in Alaska and Washington State. Our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, is live here in our studios in New York City. Carl, here we are. You know, we thought it was going to be over last night. It ain't over.
There it is, Megan. That is our new map, and it's not completed for the U.S. Senate. The frustration in Colorado clearly getting under Michael Bennet's skin, sort of jumping out ahead of things in order to make this victory speech in advance of either a call or a concession. And there are still two left, two that probably aren't going to be resolved by any hurry-up calls or victory claims. We're talking, of course, about Washington and Alaska. In Washington, where it's a write-in campaign, there hasn't been a heck of a lot of movement, and there may not be for some time now. The battle here between Patty Murray and Dino Rossi continues. The question really is whether or not the Cascade Mountains, which cut the state right down north-south there, will have a big enough Republican vote for Dino Rossi in the eastern part of the state, particularly 2 congressional districts where it was very strong in this part of the state. The question then becomes, if Washington were to go, where would that end up leaving things in terms of the broader race? Well, the truth of the matter is it's not going to affect the actual Republican majority. That's going to stay where it is. They're not going to actually have a GOP majority. It'll still be in the minority. But then, of course, there's also this one, Alaska. And it looks as though the Republicans will be able to hold it. The Democrat not going to win it, but we don't know when. We don't know if that's the case, nor do we know when that will happen. So Republicans stay in the minority, but when you take a look at their gains overall and the fact that there are a lot of centrist Democrats now in the U.S. Senate who might be inclined to flip, Republicans think they may have something close to a governing number in the U.S. Senate, notwithstanding that they're still not in the majority.
Yeah, looks like Senator Wyden is doing well in Alaska. We'll see whoever that could be.
Right.
Carl, thanks. Well, breaking news this afternoon on a possible sniper in the D.C. area. Shots fired toward the Coast Guard recruiting office in Virginia. What is going on down there? We'll tell you what the FBI now says about this case and, in particular, the gun. And victory for Republicans, also a victory for minority candidates. GOP wins that will diversify the political landscape just ahead. Plus the X factor. What impact the overhaul of health care had on the election results, and what will likely happen next.
It's going to be very, very exciting. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog of the controversy.
Fox News election alert for you. The president taking some tough questions in the last hour on the health care overhaul, as well as the midterm results. Our own Mike Emanuel asked President Obama about what his plans are for the health care law going forward.
If the Republicans have ideas for how to improve our health care system, if they want to suggest modifications that would deliver faster and more effective reform to a healthcare system that has been wildly expensive for too many families and businesses, and certainly for our federal government, I'm happy to consider some of those ideas.
Ari Fleischer is a former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush, and Pat Caddell is a Democratic pollster and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Ari, let me start with you. So the president says he's happy to possibly tweak. He's going to listen to ideas, but he says, look, at the end of the day, it was an ugly mess when it came to the process, which it had to be in this kind of politicized environment, but the outcome was good.
Megan, you have to understand how big a repudiation this is by historical standards. You have to go back 72 years to find a midterm election where any party lost as many seats. In fact, the Democrats last night lost more seats than the Republicans did in 2006 and 2008 combined. And to put it in a little more perspective, in 1982, Reagan's first midterm, unemployment was 10.8% in October of that election year, and the Republicans lost only 26 seats. Here, the Democrats have lost 60. This is a powerful, rare, huge rejection of policy. And it's not process, it's not communications. The real question is now, can a man who really is a doctrinaire liberal, who believes in what he did genuinely, and you saw that in the news conference today, can he pare it back? Can he forge compromise with majority Republicans now? And it's too soon to say. I don't think anybody knows whether Barack Obama can do that. The words start out well, as we would hope after an election. A lot remains to be seen.
Pat, I don't think anybody expects President Obama to sign any law, any bill into law that's going to repeal his signature piece of legislation, the health care law. But my question for you is he not getting it? Because all these viewers are emailing me saying he doesn't get it.
He doesn't get it, and the exit polls show it, and the results do. This was not just the economy, as important as it was not the decisive factor in this election. Health care was. I had a special rundown of the exit poll. We had slightly a Democratic exit poll, but about half the people favored repeal, said they favored repeal. So we broke those people out by party. Among Democrats who favored repeal, 36% voted for Republican. Among independents who favored repeal, 86-9 voted Republican. You could see Democrats going down who voted for the health care bill being wiped out. And to back up the point that I already made, look, in my lifetime, this is the first time my party will have less than 200 seats in the House Healthcare is a major thing. You look at the economy. Look, 34% of people who said their financial situation worsened voted Democratic. I can show you lots of evidence. Just look at Nevada and California, two of the highest, Nevada, the highest unemployment states in the country, and two Democratic senators. Democrats did all right. It was where health care killed them, and they don't understand. The American people found this a crime against democracy. I've been saying this since March. They want it repealed, and this issue is going to go on, and he seems absolutely tone deaf.
That's that's the question. Is it going to go on and on? Because you got half of the electorate favoring repeal, the other half not favoring it.
By the way,
you got a president who clearly doesn't favor it, but you got the GOP saying this is one of their top 3 initiatives in the House now. Ari, and then I'll go back to you, Pat.
Well, the problem is Barack Obama really needs his liberal base. He's not Bill Clinton. He can't triangulate. He is doctrinaire in his beliefs about liberal policies and the good that they can do. And so it's hard for him to walk away from that ideologically. It's also a problem for the future. I looked ahead in the 2012 election. Only 10 Republican senators are up, but there are 22 Democrat senators are up. Only one of those Republicans is probably going to be in a tight race. Almost 10 Democrats will be. So the future for Democrats and how they vote is very, very iffy. Republicans, mark my words, Megan, they will in the House put repeal on the floor, and it will likely pass, and many Democrats will vote for its passage.
Because the thing is, Pat, I think the president's right that the American people didn't like the process by which the health care law was passed. But does that ignore the complaints that people have about that law substantively, about how it affects them and their health care and their money and the care they get with their doctor and so on?
People feel that it is interfering with their health care, that it is going to cost them more, and that's already being borne out. They're afraid that they are going to see the deficits rise, which they will. Overall, and by the way, this half in favor, we have other polls, Rasmussen at 58, we have Fox in the 50s. Point is, this is a law that's been passed, we were told would be popular. People are now seeing it as more and more evidence comes out. And I think the courts may still knock this out over the Band-Aids, particularly given how strongly Americans feel. But this is, when I say it's going to go on, this fight will go through 2012 as people find out more about this and learn more and get dropped by their plans. They're getting angrier. There was a compromise for a real health care reform incrementally in this country, and the president decided not to do that, and they've drawn the line on this. Only 15, remember this, Megan, only 15%, like the bill as it's passed, supports keeping it as it is.
There was some irony in Nancy Pelosi. I think it was an interview she gave to ABC News before it was passed, saying, look, you got to do what's right. And, essentially you got to put your what's right ahead of your own partisan ideals and hopes for re-election. And that was her appeal to her members who were worried about not getting re-elected. And now we see that so many didn't.
Well, she also said we had to pass the bill to find out what was in it. And now people are finding out, and it's not going well.
All right, Pat. All right, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Well, folks, the Tea Party was a force to be reckoned with in these midterms. Speaking of Nancy Pelosi, she thought they were AstroTurf. It turned out they were nothing of the sort. And while the movement had some big losses last night, it also scored some big wins. So what is next for these folks? We will talk live to one of the founders who you may recognize from an interesting appearance she had on this broadcast. And a Kelly's Court update with a political twist. Brand new developments now on the radio host who was yanked off the air in Alaska after he weighed in on the Murkowski writing campaign. Stay with us.
I'm tired of this mamsy-pamsy footing around and letting the government break the law day after day after day. We sit back there and do nothing. This is honorable. This is the most honorable thing you can do. When the government says they're going to assist Lisa Murkowski illegally, we are going to make it as hard as possible.
This is a Fox News alert. New information on a shooting at the U.S. Coast Guard recruiting office in Virginia. The FBI is now confirming that the gun is the same weapon used in 4 other shootings at military facilities in the D.C. area, including the Pentagon. Our own Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with the latest on this. Jennifer?
Megan, it almost feels like the days when the D.C. sniper was on the loose. It's not as serious, of course, because this sniper is firing at inanimate buildings, not people. But the latest shooting at the Coast Guard office, recruiting office, as you mentioned, which took place early Tuesday morning in Woodbridge, Virginia, was the 5th shooting at military facilities in the Washington, D.C. area since October 17th, when the gunman first struck. And now FBI investigators are linking all 5 shootings, saying that the forensics suggests that the same weapon was used. The first shots were fired at the Marine Museum, you'll remember, at Quantico, Virginia. 24 hours later, the gunman struck here at the Pentagon, firing bullets into the 3rd and 4th floor windows of the building, a part of the building that was under construction, but the bullets were lodged in the windows, and that's how they were able to check them. In addition to firing 6 bullets at the Pentagon on that day, the shooter has also fired on a Marine recruiting station and went back again and fired at the Marine Corps Museum at Quantico last Friday. And now on Tuesday morning at the front, it fired at the front door of the Coast Guard Recruiting Center in Virginia. The ballistics now link all 5 of the shootings. Investigators do not think that this suspect wants to harm individuals or service members. They think the shooter has an issue with the Marines as an institution, and that maybe he or she has had a traumatic event in their lives recently, such as a divorce or loss of job. Authorities are saying that the shooter should come forward, and if they can resolve this issue, they will. Megan?
All right, Jennifer Griffin, thank you. Well, it was a day of victory and defeat for the Tea Party last night. Rand Paul, a big win in Kentucky. Sharon Angle and, well, Christine O'Donnell, disappointing supporters of the grassroots group. The woman credited with founding the Tea Party movement, did you know there was such a person? Is live here in 10 minutes. And we're hearing from political analysts across the country that last night's election was a rejection of Speaker Pelosi, President Obama, and the Democrats' agenda. Joe Trippi, former campaign advisor to, or manager, I should say, for Howard Dean, answers that charge next.
There's no doubt that as I reflect on the results of the election, it underscores for me that I've got to do a better job, just like everybody else in Washington does.
Well, some developing news now on those terror scares last week. Fox News has learned there is growing evidence that both bombs uncovered on cargo planes bound for the United States, well, really, they weren't cargo planes, they were passenger planes, included cell phone detonators linked to an alarm function. Sources also tell Fox News they believe Al-Qaeda in Yemen did a so-called dry run ahead of last week's scare. GM's October sales are up 3.5%. Strong demand for pickups and wagons helped. GM is expected to launch an initial public offering later this month. Well, the 2010 midterms not only made history because of the big GOP sweep, but also for some of the minority candidates elected to office, including Tim Scott, who becomes the first African-American congressman from South Carolina since Reconstruction. Trace Gallagher has more on that from our West Coast newsroom. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Megan, for example, Harry Reid was getting all the big headlines in Nevada last night, but there was also a big governor's race going on. Republican Brian Sandoval, a former federal judge, becomes the first Hispanic governor in the history of Nevada. He beat, by the way, Rory Reid. Rory Reid is Harry Reid's son. And then there's New Mexico. Republican Susana Martinez, she becomes the nation's first Hispanic female governor. She defeated Dianne Dennis, as you see there, pretty soundly. In South Carolina, the Tea Party-backed candidate Nikki Haley, whose parents, by the way, are from India, she becomes the first female governor in that state, beating Vincent Shaheen. You mentioned, Megan, Tim Scott being elected to Congress down in South Carolina, but in Florida, the military veteran Allen West becomes the first black Republican elected to Congress in Florida in 140 years. I just want to finish off by kind of showing you some of these numbers. These are from exit polls, so they're not final numbers, but it gives you a very good indication of the turnout last night compared to 2008. 13% African Americans, lower this year, but look at how they swung toward the GOP. Now move on to the Hispanic turnout. In 2008, 8%, the very same as during this year, but also an increase of those who voted for Republicans. And finally, the turnout among women's 2008, 2010, identical, but a very large swing toward Republicans. Minorities, Republicans won the night. It was a big night for Republican minority candidates across the country, Megan.
Wow. Trace Gallagher, thanks. Well, many analysts are today saying that the midterm vote was a referendum on President Obama, or at least his policies. Last hour, that was the first question the president took during his news conference in the East Room.
Are you willing to concede at all that what happened last night was not just an expression of frustration about the economy, but a fundamental rejection of your agenda? And given the results, who do you think speaks to the true voice of the American people right now, you or John Boehner?
I think that there is no doubt that people's number one concern is the economy. And what they were expressing great frustration about is the fact that we haven't made enough progress on the economy. We've stabilized the economy. We've got job growth in the private sectors. But people all across America aren't feeling that progress. They don't see it. And they understand that I'm the President of the United States, and that my core responsibility is making sure that we've got an economy that's growing, a middle class that feels secure, that jobs are being created. And so I think I've got to take direct responsibility for the fact that we have not made as much progress as we need to make.
Well, Joe Trippi is the former campaign manager for Howard Dean and now a Fox News contributor, and also the man behind the Jerry Brown victory. We've decided we're going to add that to your introduction, Joe, since he won. Unlike Howard Dean. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rub it in. Okay, back now to the business of the day, and that is President Obama. You know, I was mentioning this with our panel. In response to that, I must have gotten dozens of emails from the viewers saying, no, he doesn't get it. It's not just that we're not feeling it yet. We are rejecting his approach to governing, big government and so on. The president said, look, that's not my approach. I just had to do it because we were in an emergency economic situation. And you say what as to whether he is getting it?
Well, I think the speech was exactly what he needed to do. He's not going to start negotiating with the new Republican Congress in front of us right now. But I do think he said that it was literally a shellacking. I think he said, and that it felt bad. But look, what's going on here is I think fundamentally Barack Obama, sort of from the primaries where I was on the other side of him, it's always been a guy who believed in doing what he felt was the right thing for the country. Regardless of what, others think, he keeps carrying that mantle. And I think that's what happened here. A lot of health care, a lot of these things that people are disagreeing with him on, he still believes, okay, I'll take that hit because I'm doing what's right for the country. There were a number of Democrats who made those votes believing the same thing, and they were willing to sacrifice their careers or hoped they would get through and not have to sacrifice their careers. But 60 of them did last night, and seven U.S. senators. I mean, the key thing now is the president willing to put because now it's going to be his neck on the line 2 years from now, keep doing this where he just keeps doing what he believes is right for the country.
What's the reality of that, Joe? What do you say is the answer? Because that is the $64 million question. Will he continue with that same method of governing that got so many Democrats in trouble, or is he going to shift because he realizes if he doesn't, he may be on the receiving end of this same message in 2012?
I really believe he's going to continue to do what he thinks is right for the country. Now, the mitigating factor here is a new Republican Congress that to get anything done, he is going to have to find consensus, or neither side will be able to get anything done.
Yeah.
And I think if that happens, you're going to have a bunch of angry American people out there still looking for somebody somewhere to find some solutions that even the president admits hasn't happened as quickly as they'd like. So, but I do believe he's motivated, and this is that strange, sort of conundrum for the administration. Is I firmly believe he's motivated by what he believes is right for the country, regardless of what the pundits, what the press, and frankly, when the American people aren't there for him, he believes I'll take that hit because I'm not going to do what's popular. I'm going to do what's right. And by the way, he knew this on health care. All the polls had shown for months that health care was unpopular with the American people.
Yeah.
I don't think he did it in defiance. He did it saying, I'm going to take the hit. I know it's unpopular, but I'm still going to do what's right. And that, in the end, is what Nancy Pelosi did. And that's what cost us the House last night and cost those 6, maybe 7 senators their careers. And now there's two things. How many more Democrats now are going to say, watching that happen, say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do what's right, even though it's going to get in my career? I'm not sure we're going to. So that's going to be a problem for him holding the Democrats together. But then at the same time, he's got to work with Republicans to get anything done.
Yeah, it's one thing once you've been thrown out of office to talk with the president on the phone, as he suggested has been happening, and saying, I don't regret it because I did what I thought was right. It's another when you have not yet been booted out of office to say, I'd love to find a way where I could do what's right and also keep my job.
Exactly.
Joe, listen, you were great last night. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Meg.
Joe Trippi, everybody. Well, in the last 12 months, we saw millions of Americans get fired up about what was happening in Washington.
With all due respect, you work for us. You are a representative of us. We don't care what you think. We want you to represent us as a majority.
Remember that? Many of these folks who were upset jumped on the Tea Party bandwagon, but some of their favorite candidates are not heading to Washington. Instead, some of them, we don't include Joe Miller in that yet, but these two on the sides, obviously, O'Donnell and Engel, are heading home. So what's the new temperature of the Tea Party today? One of their original founders and a woman who defended defiantly Christine O'Donnell's pick as the GOP nomination in Delaware joins me next. Plus, he got kicked off the air for trying to sink Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski's write-in campaign. The radio station said it would reevaluate the situation after he was suspended on Monday. Its decision in a Kelly's Court verdict next.
Yeah, you're election tampering. This is outrageous.
I'm only tampering with the election so that the right candidate wins.
Yeah, well, listen to that statement. It's what's right according to thee. So
I'm only trying to trick voters so that the right candidate actually gets the victory.
Fox News election alert, new developments in the Alaska Senate race. Moments ago, Republican candidate Joe Miller sent out a news release asking for donations for his coming legal battle. Joe Miller is against a write-in campaign by Republican incumbent Lisa Murkowski. Right now, the write-in ballots are holding the lead in this race, but we don't know if all of those write-ins actually have Murkowski's name on them. We are assuming it's so, but we don't know. There were 150 names or so on the write-in list, many of whom were bogus candidates, and we'll get to that in a bit. Well, as we learn more, we'll bring it to you. We're going to be watching this race, obviously, very, very closely. While Miller is trailing in Alaska, apparently, Nevada's Sharon Engel and Delaware's Christine O'Donnell lost their Senate races last night. All three of these candidates were backed by the Tea Party and Sarah Palin, and Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski taking a jab at the former Alaska governor.
What I have always done is I've said, this is about Alaska. What I do is for Alaska. I think that was recognized here in the state. Sarah's going to do what Sarah's going to do. I'm going to do what I need to do for Alaska.
There's never been any love lost there. Well, Amy Kramer is the chairwoman of the Tea Party Express and one of the original founders of the Atlanta Tea Party movement. Amy, thank you so much for coming back. I've really been looking forward to this because when Christine O'Donnell won that nomination in Delaware, and a lot of Republicans, Karl Rove, but many others said, that this is going to cost the Republicans the majority. You came on here and said, don't count her out so quickly. That's what everybody said about the primary, and then she won it by 6 points, and she's going to win this election too. And the truth is, Amy, she never gained traction. She was viewed as too extreme, as not qualified, and now people view her loss as, in a way, a repudiation of the Tea Party movement. And to them, you say what?
Well, Megan, thanks for having me back on. And, we fully supported Christine O'Donnell, and we don't regret that at all. I mean, we would much rather have somebody in there that's a Democrat voting as a Democrat than somebody Republican in name only voting along the lines of a Democrat. And, if nothing else, she shook up the GOP, the Republican Party in the state of Delaware, and it will never be the same. And that's what this movement's about, is taking on the Republican Party and getting them to go back to their conservative platform. And so for that reason alone, we do not regret supporting Christine O'Donnell.
But how do you find the line? Because you had a couple of big victories last night, too. I mean, the Tea Party backed Rand Paul, won decisively in Kentucky. Marco Rubio, big win down in Florida. And just to name a couple. But how do you draw the line now going forward to find candidates who believe in what you believe, limited government and so on, who are electable, and candidates who believe in what you believe but are not electable because they have a long list of problems or they say nutty things, or, those were some of the problems with Engel and O'Donnell.
Well, Megan, the bigger picture is here. I think MSNBC amazingly reported earlier today that 113 out of 129 candidates, Tea Party-backed candidates, won. That's a 87% victory rate. So we're proud of that. And the bigger story is that we fired Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. Barack Obama's seat was taken over by a Republican. Wisconsin is now turned to a red state. So there are many victories across this country that we're focused on. We didn't expect to win every single race, but we're not going to back down. We're not going to stop fighting. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to change it overnight. And there's going to be another election 2 years from now, and we're going to work just as hard, if not harder, to send more conservatives to Washington.
I want to ask you about Nancy Pelosi because she has been a target of the Tea Party and vice versa. It's tough to forget her initial thoughts about your organization, and the Tea Party supporters nationwide. Remember this? Listen to this.
There's a legitimate grassroots opposition that's going on, or is it an astroturf type of thing?
I think they're astroturf. You be the judge.
And that was among the nicest things that was said about you. You were called un-American. Right. People who oppose the health care law called un-American and not patriotic and so on. And so now that she has lost her job as Speaker, you say what to her?
Well, I think that she should be an example for some of these others that are still in Washington, because they need to wake up and listen to what we, the people, are saying. They have tried to push this agenda down our throats of excessive spending, intrusive government, a government takeover of our healthcare system, and that's not what the American people want. And so, if nothing else, the people in Washington need to wake up and pay attention, because 2 years isn't that far away. And it's unfortunate what happened to Nancy Pelosi, but good riddance. That's how we within the movement feel. We're looking forward to change and getting this economy back on a sound economic footing.
I know you'll be watching the newly elected candidates, no matter what their political stripes, to hold them true to the principles you guys have espoused. Amy, thank you so much for coming on. All the best to you.
Thanks, Megan.
Well, new reports of voter fraud today in some key races. The very latest on that, next.
Are you receiving? I'm tired of this mamsy-pamsy footing around and letting the government break the law day after day after day. We sit back there and do nothing. This is honorable. This is the most honorable thing you can do. When the government says they're going to assist Lisa Murkowski illegally, we are going to make it as hard as possible to...
Well, there you hear it. Back on the air in a Kelly's Court verdict. Dan Fagan returning to his radio show in Anchorage, Alaska now, after being silenced for trying to sink one candidate's campaign. See, he was yanked off the air last week, accused of crossing a legal line after he called on his listeners to go down and register as write-in candidates in the Alaska Senate race. He was hoping to make it harder for the voters to find Lisa Murkowski's name. That's why that list of the write-in candidates has over 150 candidates' names on it. A response, he says, to the state allowing voters to see that list of write-in candidates at the polling places on Election Day. That was a request that she had. It had never been allowed before, but a judge said, yeah, it's fine. The Murkowski camp cried foul, accusing this guy, Dan Fagan, of almost violating the law, electioneering, they call it. Well, Fagan was temporarily suspended by his radio station, but he was quickly reinstated on Monday. He says he still stands by his stunt. And new questions today following voting problems in several midterm races. Some of those problems now leading to investigations amid allegations of vote buying, illegal campaign activity, intimidation, and suppression. Senior correspondent Eric Shawn has been following all of this live in our New York City studios. Eric?
Hi, Megan. Well, there could be another recount in Minnesota, this time in the governor's race. Republican Tom Emmer is trailing Democrat Mark Dayton by about 9,000 votes, and there are questions about the election. Just last week, authorities charged 47 people with illegally voting in the 2008 race. You remember back then, Democrat Al Franken defeated Republican Senator Norm Coleman by just 312 votes. but voter rights groups say felons and others voted illegally in that election. Well, the group Election Integrity Watch posted voter fraud billboards and deployed poll watchers for this election. They say sufficient irregularities support contesting it, and the Republican State Party wants a recount.
I don't know if I'm suggesting fraud or incompetence. We don't know yet. And that's what we're going to be pursuing very vigorously. What I'd like to make sure is that the votes are counted and that everything is done correctly to make sure people aren't being disenfranchised.
Well, elsewhere in San Francisco, they say ballots were stolen. A polling inspector arrested for allegedly swiping up to 75 ballots in a voter list. Allegedly broke into the counting machine. No reason given there why. And there are vote-buying allegations in several counties in Kentucky. While in California, Kansas, and Maryland, they're investigating robocalls that told people to vote today. And there's news on the Acorn front. Remember Acorn? Well, the group officially announced last night that they have filed for bankruptcy. That, though, won't stop a trial in Nevada, in Las Vegas later this month, a trial on Acorn for alleged voter fraud-related charges. And, Megan, if any of our viewers suspect problems where you live, voterfraud@foxnews.com is our address.
Thank you, sir. Eric Shawn on it for us. Well, he was in a really close re-election race. And after the Democrat won, you will not believe how he celebrated. Trust us, you don't want to miss this video.